the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please remain standing for a moment of silence in honor of our veterans, servicemen and women, and those who have given the ultimate sacrifice. Thank you. Lovely. Absolutely. Thank you, Councilor Matheson. Thank you. Okay, clerk will call the roll, please.
Councilor Anderson? Here. Councilor Kamel? I thought he was here. Councilor Condon? Here. Councilor Crowe? Here. Councilor Matheson? Here. Councilor Murphy? Councilor O'Malley? Here. Councilor Seeker? Here. Councilor Spatafora? Councilor Winslow? Here. Councilor DeMaria?
Here. Thank you. And just a reminder to all the councilors, it's very difficult from a perspective watching this on MATV, so please try to speak into the microphone tonight. Thank you. Also, MATV will be recording this evening's meeting, and one of our Malden residents, John Mayara, will also be recording, so please be aware there will be audio and video recordings of this meeting. First order of business.
City Assessor James O'Brien will appear before the City Council for the purpose of holding a tax classification hearing.
Welcome, everybody. It's nice to look out and see all these residents here and our young Malden Civic Youth Group again here every week. So this is wonderful. Couple of minutes for our city assessor. Okay. So we welcome City Assessor Jim O'Brien, who will appear before us for the purpose of tax classification hearing. This is a public hearing. City Assessor Jim O'Brien is here to speak in favor of tax classification. Thank you. Nope. Clerk, please show the record. Councilor Murphy and Councilor Kamel are here this evening. Thank you.
Good evening. The package I handed out for you folks consists of the portion that gets looked at for tonight's votes and has to get submitted to the state. It's 4 pages. Actually, what we submit to the state is about 30 pages, but these 4 are key for you folks to make your decisions tonight. Following that, there's two handouts I put together, H and D, and it does not mean high definition. It's anything but. H is what my sort of presentation is. D is where I'll reference a lot of data and numbers and stats and whatnot. So if I could, I'm opening up with H. And it's good evening. This is our tax classification hearing, a required public hearing each fiscal year where your body, the elected officials, along with input from the administration, are charged with and responsible for considering and ultimately voting on a number of matters that pertain to how properties here in the city of Malden are taxed. More specifically, you're asked to set a tax rate, or as the case may be, tax rates. And also, there's consideration as to whether we're to continue with the residential exemption program, and if that's a yes, then there's a percentage that needs to be voted on that program. So before I get into those 3 or 4 main sections, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to just go in depth a little more on each of them, get into the weeds, so to speak. It addresses a lot of the questions that the assessor's office fields throughout the year coming from your constituents about how we do what we do. So the first thing I would say is that for this fiscal year, Malden has 13,432 parcels. And tax bills are calculated by multiplying 2 variables, 2 factors, and those are the assessed value and the tax rate. I'm going over to page 2 of my H section now. And again, 2 or 3 main components, or I should say, I'm sorry, two components that are key in arriving at one's tax bill. The first area is the assessed value. It's the responsibility of the assessors. There's a lot of oversight from the state government, the Department of Revenue, on how we do what we do. For the majority of the properties in the city, 95% of the properties, which I'll call small residential, meaning 1-family condo, 2-family, and 3-family. What we use there is sales that come from the market. The laws that we work under say that when we value property for assessment purposes, it's to be based on the market. So we constantly study the market, and we're very fortunate that it's an active community in terms of sales. We have 500, 600, 700 sales every year. So statistically, that makes us a little more confident in the approach that we do, and you hear margin of error and whatnot. So what I've presented on that, again, H2, halfway down, is sale prices in 2017 calendar year. So in Malden, the average single-family home sold for about $460,000. The average condo was 321, and then you have 2 families and 3 families. To the right of that is the proposed 19 assessments. They come from and they're supported by the sales. You'll also notice that every one of the proposed assessments is a little lower than the sale price. Assessors have to answer to many people, not the least of which is you. So we need to raise the tax dollars, but we also need to report to the state, and they want to know that we're adjusting the values in keeping with what the market's doing. But we also don't want to spend our whole year in court. So we try to find a balance between being as close to 100% of market as we can. Obviously, there's properties that are lower, some that are higher. The remainder of that page 2, just goes on to say that, you know, what property sold for last year, which is what I presented, is the basis for this year's assessed values. And likewise, the properties that sell today, which was already starting to monitor, the deeds come in the door, we're looking at what stuff is selling for. That's going to be the data we're going to use to value property in fiscal 20 next year. I make reference to a handout, D2. I think I went right by that. I got to see what D2 is. I went right by D1 as well. So D2 is just a little breakdown of those 500 or 600 properties that sold. They're broken down by, you know, how many single families sold. We have 5,600 single families. It says the 209 sold. And those are the ones that we use in the analysis in valuing single families. Back to my H. I also make reference to a handout of D3. And in D3, I went and looked at our neighbors, the competition, and come up with what properties sold for in the other communities. So I obviously included every contiguous community and then added a couple others that I thought were somewhat comparable, that being Stoneham and Somerville. So that just gives you a sense of, you know, how many properties are selling in each of these communities and what they sold for. If we key in on the single families, Malden's average was 460. So you can see that, you know, Medford, Melrose, Somerville, and Stoneham have a higher average, yet we have a higher value here in compared to Saugus, Revere, and Everett. So sort of right in the middle, there's about 6 communities there. I failed to mention at the beginning that I was going to try to go through the entire presentation that I thought would be about 10 minutes, but I do see a light. I'm fine. Again, I know there's 2 or 3 separate sections, and I'm fine either way if you want to. I'm done talking about assessed values, so if you want to stop here and focus in on that before we go to tax rate and residential exemption, I'm fine either way.
Thank you. I do have a light. Councilor Anderson.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Mr. O'Brien, we drill down again on the difference between the how you averaged out the sales and how you came up with an assessed value. I could never quite understand.
Sure. I did touch on it. So we take all our sales. Let's talk about the single family. There was 209.
Okay. So if we go to D, I think it was, we saw 200. Yeah. D3. D3, yep.
Yep. So I guess the best answer would be that we isolate the sales each year, and McDonald's does hamburgers. Assessors does sales ratios. So we study what properties sell for, contrast it to what they're assessed for at time of sale, and it gives us a ratio. The deed comes in the door, it's sold for $100,000. I can't get to the computer fast enough to see what it's assessed for. It's assessed for $90,000. That one statistic says we're off 10%. It's only one statistic, though. That goes to my issue of saying we're fortunate in having a lot of sales, because we do that sales rate. It's actually, along with our vendor who help us on this, they have software programs that we use. So there's ratio studies that are done. And if there was 10 of those examples that I just gave you, you know, it was 0.90, because law says you're supposed to be here at market. It's selling here. We're always trying to get to the market. So as we study the sales, we develop ratios, which gives us an indication of how much we should be be changing the assessed value. And I can tell you that because a lot of folks won't believe it, but I was here at a time period when the values were reduced it all came back to what was happening in the market. And that was back, I think, around '02, '03. You know, again, we studied the market, the sales were down, so then we had to adjust going into that next tax year. I'm not sure if that answers it, Counselor?
No.
Oh, sorry.
No, it hasn't.
Okay.
Maybe I'm a little slow here in the uptake, but maybe someone else will ask some other
Okay.
questions second. Maybe some others will.
Okay.
Let him answer the question.
Yeah. Well, I do have other lights on the floor. I'm going to move forward, if that's okay. Councilor Winslow?
Yeah, so I mean, I think maybe to follow up a little bit on Councilor Anderson's question, I mean, for the audience too. So myself and my wife as individual homeowners, you actually do an individual assessment of our property that's different than everybody else's, right? And then each year you adjust the assessed value based on the overall average.
Correct.
So you don't come back and reappraise our house every year, but you adjust that based on the overall. So that's what you're using the average for. So my assessed value goes up by average, but because I have a bigger or smaller home than someone else, what you've appraised my own property isn't based on the average, it's based on my own property, but the assessment goes up based on everybody's sales. That's basically what.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's just, I don't know if that's what you were trying to get at, or I don't know, but.
And in terms of reassessing, because I hear that quite a bit, we reassess every year, but it's coming from the market. As far as the individual properties that we go out to, there's a multi-pronged approach on that. Number one, we're supposed to go out once every 10 years per the state. Number two, every year, the 500 sales that we're all over, we go out on all of those because we have to verify our sales. We want to know what $150,000 commanded from the market in order to compare that place to your property. So we go out at different times for different reasons, but the sales are critical to what we do.
Right.
Thank you, Councilor Winslow. Councilor Kamel has a question.
Well, more just share what I thought was happening, and maybe you can correct me or if I'm wrong. So in terms of the difference between the appraised value and the market value, it was my understanding that's generally caused by the fact that the prices are rising and you're always sort of lagging the market because you're looking back maybe to sales from 6 months to 18 months ago, right? You're using those sales.
If
Right, and
Yeah.
so some of that gap, isn't it because of that timeline?
Right,
And can I just?
Sure, I'm sorry.
And on the other way, if prices were falling, wouldn't the gap, I think you referenced that a little bit, the gap would be the other way. So maybe things start selling for 425 when you're still assessing at 450 because it's a lagging effect when prices were higher. So it's just a lagging effect.
Right. So we're here tonight talking about fiscal 19, and it's predicated, those sales, you read my thing, it says calendar 17.
Yeah.
We stop the clock like an accountant on 1/1 before the fiscal year begins. So we're looking at data from the previous year. So in a rising market, that can be more significant, because we're always chasing value, whether it's going, regardless of the way it's going. So yeah, we are behind. And I tell folks, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, that we're always behind. That's the way our system works.
Right, so you're not like the stock market where you're trying to real-time assess, what's the market value of this right now.
Right.
You're saying you are bound to do it only based on that historical data.
It actually is refreshing for assessors who come from the appraisal world, because when they go out for bankers, everyone's looking at current value, and we're dealing with done deals from a year ago, and that's
solid
nice.
data. Okay.
You get solid information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there are no more lights. Mr. O'Brien, did you want to complete your
I would.
presentation?
I
Yeah.
think it would be necessary. So I'm going to move, I'm back to H, and I'm going to move on to the third page, H3, which is tax rates. Levy, which you'll hear about, divided by total value produces a tax rate. Simply stated, that's a single rate. Again, levy, which you have, it's 90 million, divided by total value, which you have, which is 7.6 billion, produces a rate. That rate this year is $11.73 for every taxpayer. However, it's not that simple. Because in Massachusetts, there's a provision in the law that you can shift tax burden onto one class of folks at the expense of others. So it's known as shifting. 120 communities out of 350 do it. All the communities in Eastern Mass, for the most part, do it. All the communities in Greater Boston do it. Every city that is contiguous to us does it. This city has done it. I've been here since '99. This city has shifted every year I've been here, and I believe prior to that. There's maximums that you can shift, and the maximum is 1.75. I know last year Mr. Kamel asked a question about that, if I could express it another way, and I think what I told him was, whenever the residential people pay $1, the commercial people pay $1.75. Understand that all the properties still have their own assessed value. So 200,000 times $10 is one thing, but when it's a million times that rate, so it's two factors. It's assessed value and tax rate. So in our city, as I said, we have traditionally shifted, and the recommendation from the Board of Assessors is that we would continue to shift to the tune of the 1.75. I know there were some questions from a constituent or two about that, and I'll try my best to address it if that's still on the table. So that's tax rates, which I'll hold. If folks want to talk about that, I see maybe Mr. O'Malley.
Councilor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Can you explain how the 1.75 shift relates to the 30% residential exemption?
I don't think it does.
So this happens before that?
Well, they're two separate events, and that will be borne out clearly if we wait and we get to the exemption, because you will see that even if you go for it or you don't, the commercial tax rate is the same. All shifting, we're getting ahead now, we're getting into a new concept.
Councilor Kamel, hold on. Go right ahead.
So I'm going to guess. The 1.75 shifts between commercial and residential, whereas the exemption just shifts within residential?
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
A+.
And I find it most that I can handle logical to talk about tax rate first. I feel like that's a bigger decision. It involves everything, whereas the second item is strictly about the residential folks. Now, I say that, but I was told by someone that I probably should be talking in the reverse, so I don't know.
Okay.
Meaning residential exemption before.
Yep, I'm going to go to a few more. Okay, Councilor Matheson.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I've now watched you do this for a few years, and you get better every year.
Thank you.
Better than that other Bob guy that used to do it.
Exactly.
I'd like to give some praise to
Please do.
all our assessors here, Bob Donnelly, Kathy French, and Jim O'Brien. Thank you all. So I think I know the answer to this. We have rates for residential, and commercial industrial. Commercial industrial, are those the same, those are the same rate, correct?
Yeah, there's, there is 3 subsets, I like to think of it as, inside of the commercial class.
Okay.
And if you've heard the term CIP, it's, let me give you a reference where you can see it in black and white. How about if you go to D1?
Okay, I'm there.
Okay, so we have the residential class, which is the biggest contributor to value here in the city, $6.8 billion. And then there's open space, which apparently we don't have any. And then the last 3 get talked about as a group because they all incur the commercial tax rate. But there are 3, if you will, subsections. It's commercial, industrial, and personal property. Personal property, real bad choice of words. It's commercial business property. So I'm not sure if I answered it, Counselor.
Well, you were saying that there's 3 classifications for the commercial and industrial side of things versus the residential real estate rate. And personal property doesn't relate to regular folks, it relates to the business world.
Business.
Okay.
Chattels.
Right, and personal property is taxed at that higher rate?
At the commercial rate.
At the full shift.
Yep.
So we do the full shift for commercial and industrial. We could break those out.
And personal property.
Oh, right. We could break those out separately, shift-wise. We don't, but we could. Is that right, or no?
I don't know if that's the case, Counselor, to be honest with you.
Not a practice we've done. And this is another part that I think I know the answer to, but I think it's important to ask it. The residential rate, which is the preferable rate, the better rate for all the regular folks that live here.
A shifted rate, you mean?
These mega apartment buildings that are going up everywhere, which rate do they pay? They pay that higher rate, they pay that lower rate
No,
that guys like you and me?
They pay the residential rate.
They pay the lower rate.
They do.
Well, that's a shame. Okay, that's my question, though. And
Okay.
I did have the answer, but I wanted to.
All right.
Yeah.
And if I could just add on that, I know 20 years, I heard that every year about the displeasure that those big investment-type properties only have to pay the residential rate.
Yeah, because they're making a lot of money on those properties.
It's state law.
Yeah.
And
because people live there.
And
That's why they're paying
it's habitational, right? And if there's the retail on the ground floor, we do tax that on a commercial. That's what we have, split rate properties, mixed use.
That might be why all these apartment building operators want to convert their negotiated retail space into living space, because they'll
For the
pay a
lower
lower
rate?
rate. They're
Yeah.
always asking us, look, I know we agreed to ground floor retail, but we'd love
Yeah.
to take this 500 square feet and make that a residential, amenity area or another residence.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, I believe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the impetus from this body to implement the residential exemption may have been a result from the dissatisfaction with the fact that what we consider the commercial properties.
And that's something you're going to get to later in your presentation.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Well, I did notice, I thought this was great. In your opening remarks, you gave it to us on page 1. You wrote, this should only take about an hour and a half. Just kidding. You might be here for an hour and a half, though, because this is useful information. I do appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Matheson. Councilor Spatafora.
Thank you. I just have a couple assessments. I know a couple of councils already passed, touched upon some of my at least thoughts. Matheson hit the nail on the head, I think, in the apartments. We know it's not a city issue. It's a state issue, but I think that's something that's got to be addressed because most people don't realize that. They are businesses. And that's why we, at least from my perspective, we've always wanted ownership in the city, not because it's more taxes, but it does help us in terms of bringing in additional revenue. The other thing I would say is just in terms of the residential tax exemption percentage, the way I always think about it is, let's say that levy is $1 million. When you shift it from the non-owner occupied, from the owner occupied to non-owner, it stays in the same levy. You're not pushing it into the other commercial industrial. So what's happening is essentially, the money's the same, but it's, the bigger increase is going to the non-owner occupied that's making up the difference, correct?
Oh, right.
Right? That's how it works?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Now, what is the cap? Because I probably just missed it.
So we're getting into the residential exemption now, which we can if you want.
Well, you can hold off, and I can ask a question after. Because I think that goes into, as the values of the houses go up, that cap becomes a more,
Yeah, there's some good information.
It's a bigger issue.
Thank Steve Farmer. He's put together some reports
Am I jumping ahead?
we've used. No, but, no.
and I would just, so I'll let you, I will cease my question, but one question I do have, I know it's something that's asked every year. Is there a way we can get a tax bill out before the end of the year so people can do their taxes? And they can write off the property taxes for this year early?
Yeah, that's why
I know we're doing it now,
That's
but-
why we pushed for the meeting tonight, because we're running out of time to get the bills in the mail.
Correct.
And I would have liked to have done it, we'd like to do it the week after Thanksgiving, but, yeah, no, tomorrow morning, if things go well here with your votes, Mr. Davis will be getting, well, we got to
You gotta go to
submit
the
some more
state.
stuff to the state, and, yeah. But, yeah, no, in years past, we have.
Okay.
We've always waited, whether we were prepared or not, we kind of wait till right after Christmas. Some people think of it as stocking stuffer, but not everyone.
Yeah, I don't think it was talking stuff. I will cease questions, but again, Council Matheson also said, great job. I think your presentation gets better every year. To the entire team, I know it's not always easy, so great work. And, maybe one year you'll come in and say it's a lower rate. That's what I've been waiting for, but I never hear that, so.
No, we got
No,
low
I know,
rates
I know.
tonight. Every rate's,
The assessments are going up, though.
that's,
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor Spatafora. Councilor Condon?
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. O'Brien, so to clarify things, the tax rate has gone down to $11.73. Not to be fooled, because the assessments are going up, so the tax bill is going up, correct?
generally, that's the sequence.
Yes.
Assessments are rising, and so you got your levy that's capped at 2.5.
Just thinking about the people sitting home,
Yeah.
they hear the tax rate's gone down.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
when you figure out the assessments, the way they've gone up, which means they can get more money for their homes, they're going to be paying more money in taxes. Now, how does it break down as far as each group? Who gets hit the hardest? Singles, doubles, threes, or multi-unit? Is there any examples of?
sure. And that can change from year to year. I think it was our condos a couple of years ago that seemed to go up more. But if you turn to D, the very last page, I guess D8, if I got this right. Oh, that's showing you assessed value. That's not showing you tax bill. But down the bottom of that page it is. So down the bottom on D8, I'm showing you single families, condos, two-family, three-family. I'm showing you the average tax bill for the folks that are also getting the exemption. So for fiscal 19, the average tax bill, the tax bill for the average single family, providing they're getting the residential exemption, is $34.12, which looks like it's up about 97 cents from the previous year. And the condos, $17.90 is the average bill this year, again, for folks that are getting the exemption. And that's up, I don't know, 60 cents, something like that. And then you're starting to see a little more spread on the twos and the threes. The three looks like it's up 150 maybe. So, I don't want to say those are small amounts, because I've said that too many times, and someone has said, well, if it's a small amount, Mr. O'Brien, you pay it.
Yeah. Okay, the residential tax exemption. just say the city of Malden or the city council thought about going to 35% from the 30, when would the city council have to pass something like that?
Well, it certainly would be too late now to do it for
Right.
fiscal 19. I do remember, we're in 19, I do remember in the old building, about 7 years ago, at least 4 or 5 people that are sitting here debated it, along with other folks, about going to 35, and the decision was to stay at the 30. So it's something that could be done, but you probably want to, have committee and look at it. But it was debated 5 or 7 years ago by the council on going to 35.
So
and-
you would probably take it up in September of 19, say, to get it passed?
Well, no, as far as the passing, I don't know if you're getting confused about something. Up until a couple of years ago, it required special legislation at the state level, if that's what you mean, in order to catch that. That's changed because Baker 2 years ago put through the modernization bill that had many facets to it, and one of them was that you're automatically allowed to go to 35. You don't need to, so that would all be done here in Malden. It wouldn't be necessitate going into the State House or anything. But your body would have to vote it at this hearing. But you're saying,
It's too
when
late
should
for
it be
to kick
studied?
in this year, though.
Yeah, and also for us to then come in and give you the figures, we would need our fiscal 20 numbers finalized, which, is usually around Halloween and that time frame. So that, you could say to us, well, who's going to be affected and how many, and those types of questions.
Okay.
But again, the 5 or 6 of you here debated it 6 or 7 years ago.
No, I noticed some of them went to 35.
Yeah, they did, and one of my handouts gives you information on all the exemptions. D4 shows you the various towns and what the levels they're at. Because, there's only a dozen communities out of the 351 in the state that have it.
Did we take the full 2.5% we're allowed to go up?
Yes,
We did.
plus new growth.
What was the new growth? Approximately.
$1.2 million. It was $1.7
$1.2
million last year, it was $1.2 million this year.
Okay.
And that was because a lot of the prior year 1.7, that's because a lot of these buildings were coming online, but now they've been merged in, so they're not new growth because they're up and running. So that's why we had the decline, because the year before, I think we kind of had an up year,
Okay. All right, thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor Condon. I'm going to go with Councilor Murphy right now.
Thank you, Madam President. And Mr. O'Brien, thank you once again for coming in front of us. Just to clarify a couple of points that they're always confusing, I think, to residents and sometimes to ourselves. When we speak about the residential tax exemption of 30%, just for you at home listening, it's not 30% off your tax bill. There is a 30% figure that has come up that is then allocated against your tax bill, and depending on the value of your building, it might be a 25% exemption, it might be a 20% exemption, it might be a 10% exemption, because it's a dollar figure. And that's why if you look at D8 and you look at a single-family home, okay, in 2018, it's valued at $381,000, and you look at a residential condo valued at $288,000, you would think that it would be an even percentage if you look down at the bottom of the page for the average tax bill. But as you can see, the condos reap the benefit of the residential tax exemption. And we have properties in our city who don't get any, single-family homes, who don't get any residential tax exemption. So one of the reasons when we did debate this a few years ago on the 35% that we didn't go for it was because it would throw more of our homeowners into, it's actually detrimental to them. It's positive for anybody with a lower home value, but anyone with a higher home value is getting hit doubly bad, because they're getting hit on the assessment of their home, on the tax rate, plus they're picking up the additional funds that the lower assessed values aren't paying. So it's a double-edged sword, and we need to be very careful if we start to walk down that road. But, you know, everyone always thinks, oh, I'm getting a 30% tax break. You're not. And some people, I have homes in Ward 5 who are very upset because they get nothing. They actually pay more. Isn't that a correct statement?
It is, except that most of them are not in your ward, most of them are in
No, but I have some, because
Mr.
trust me.
Matheson's ward.
But I do hear from
Yeah.
people. I do hear from people because I do have those houses. So, you know, it definitely is, you know, a topic that, you know, we should continue to discuss, but it does have benefits to some and detriments to others. And, you know, we need to be really aware of that as we start to just go, you know, follow in some of those footsteps or in other cities' footsteps. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank
Just
you.
quickly, while we're talking on it, and I know Mr. Spatafora wanted to, but I held him off, and now she jumped in. But a great picture from Mr. Farmer is, if you look at this,
Which
down
number?
the bottom,
Is
there's
there-
a box, and he shows a break even. And he shows that, hey, if your property value is above here, unfortunately, you know, you're paying. That little picture, I think, is, what's the expression? Thank you.
It's not in the deed.
And so there's the average value stated
30%,
there?
where's that? Oh, there it is. Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay.
What's stated in there is the average value of $542,000, that's the assessed value. And those folks would get the exemption, and they would really benefit to the tune of zero.
Right.
Versus if we didn't have the program, taxes would have been lower. More importantly, and more upsetting, I guess, go up. And the folks that are above $805,000 pay more in taxes. And there are 64 of them this year. And most of them would be in Mr. Matheson's ward. And, what's that?
That 800 number would go down,
Yeah.
because some folks at the high end would be subsidizing the discounts for the
Right.
folks on the lower
Right.
end.
Correct.
And I think the other thing mathematically might be that the ones that are not benefiting and that will continue to not benefit by the increase will even be hit heavier.
Harder.
Yeah,
Correct.
I think.
Yep.
I'm not positive on that.
All set, Counselor Murphy?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Winslow?
Yeah, I had some questions from a constituent about, sort of more about the reappraisal process for larger buildings like multifamily. You know, you look at the sales data, I mean, the single families and 2 and 3 families, there's a lot of sales, but you look at the multifamily buildings, there was like only one sale. So what is the process for doing, you talked about individual properties, we're sort of mandated to do individual reappraisals every 10 years. What is the reappraisal process and assessment process for the larger buildings? There's some concern that those larger multifamily buildings are underappraised even more than single families, so,
Couple of things. On H2,
yeah.
one of the last larger paragraphs, actually the second last, it says how most of what I'm presenting here is about 95% of the city, you know, the singles, the twos. It says here, the larger apartment buildings, commercial and industrial properties are valued by income approach, which is a different methodology than the sales capitalization. So that method, if properties were to go into appellate tax board, and some do and have, the approach that has to be used is the income approach. Now, I tell you that for a couple of reasons. One, you get into some more theoretical about capitalization rates. Also, there's a lag with the rents. You know, I think Mr. Kamel pointed out how we're behind as far as the as-of date. So in this rising market, you know, these new buildings that have all filled up and there's no vacancy, the expression about rising tide lifts all boats, well, the other buildings, especially the ones that were pointed out by your constituents, are probably now going to have more demand. So we're going to be chasing after that. But it's something we might see in another year or so.
So is the using the income method of appraisal, is that mandated by the tax board, the state tax board?
Absolutely.
So we can't choose to do a sales method for multifamily?
No, they require that there are 3 approaches to value: sales, income, and a cost approach. And they mandate that you do 2 approaches. However, and those usually would not be the cost approach. They'd be the market, the sales, and the income. And even though they require that, they don't even look at the sales. It's the income approach that drives everything.
So if we would value on the sales, the concern is there'd be appeal by that property owner to the appellate tax board, and we would lose, basically.
Yes, and have.
So, okay. So, all right, at least I understand the dynamic there, so.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you, great.
Thank you, Councilor Winslow. Councilor Spatafora. He stepped away. Go to Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam President. Jim, we've talked about this in the past, but I just would like the public and the council to kind of hear this. Utility companies pay a personal property tax for their utilities in our community, correct?
Yes.
So for instance, you know, the cables that Comcast has throughout our community, they have a value and they're assessed a personal property tax. What number or classification is that again? You know how you have these different...
Yep, D1.
Could you refer us to a specific page so that everyone else can follow along?
D1.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. You said it. So on D1...
If you go all the way over to the far right column, that's personal property. And we this year have about, 152.
So on D1 we have a Excel like this. Is it the 500 section? Right?
Yes, that's where they're itemized. But I thought you were asking about the value.
Oh, okay, understood.
Yeah.
So the 500
codes.
1 to 500.
Yeah, those
50.
Those
are personal property.
differentiate partnership, corporation, a couple of classifications within that class.
So now what happens when National Grid has gas mains that are over 100 years old? Have they been depreciated into the ground?
Our vendor, because the personal property is highly specialized, our vendor does depreciate the assets, but there's a couple of things to point out. Number one, most of the utility valuations are done by the state, not us. Number two, you had asked me in the email about the infrastructure, and I think I told you it is taxed. You came back and said, is the gas product, and I thought I explained that it wasn't. So no, that isn't taxed. The other thing is, it was 151 million. That's tied up with about 5 people, 151 million, and it's utilities.
5 organizations.
Yes, like Boston, National Grid, Comcast, Verizon.
Okay.
You know, so they're the overwhelming amount of contributors to that type of property.
So if
for
you,
tax purposes.
So say if you owned a gas station and you had an underground tank, that tank has a value, correct? That would be personal.
But that's to a particular commercial property. That's not.
That would be commercial. That wouldn't be personal property.
No, it could be personal property, but my point is, it would be taxed to Spatafora's gas station and not the National Grid.
Exactly.
It's part of the property.
So the reason I asked that is because, you know, if you have assets in our community, the same way as if you have a house or a car, you pay taxes on the asset being in our community. I'm wondering, does state law allow us to evaluate and tax the value of the product in our community? So if National Grid, you know, or Boston Gas had 5 tankers full of gasoline, that gasoline has value. That gasoline is in our community. So I'm wondering if the natural gas going through our community, that's stored in our community, does that have a value that we can tax?
Not to my knowledge, it's the infrastructure, it's the tank that holds the gas, but not the raw material, to my knowledge.
Okay,
To the state, yeah.
thank
But
you.
there's no regulation at the city level on that.
Thank you.
Or the inspecting of the equipment or the lines.
Okay. But that'd be another reason why having National Grid redo their gas mains is a benefit to our community, because if you put in new gas mains, you know, you have a brand-new asset that needs to be taxed as such, not a 100-year-old product that's been depreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Spatafora, you did have your light on? Are you?
I was just pondering. My questions have already been answered. It was part of the residential tax assessment, which he.
And I don't think we've got there yet.
No, but you answered for Council Murphy, not me, so I got most of the answers. But thank you, Madam President.
I
Okay.
did want to correct one thing, though, for Mr. Condon. When you asked me about our rate, in my presentation, I initially explained that it's a single rate, and I quoted the figure, which was, I don't know, it's 1173, 1029. But when we do the shift, it's a different rate.
I understand.
I don't know if that was clear when we were talking
I
about
want to
that.
make sure the people watching the program understood it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I'm sure you want to finish. The only thing I would suggest is anyone who is watching that is totally confused, they certainly can reach out to you.
Absolutely.
So, and
Yep.
your phone number, just to get it out on the record, is?
781-397-7100. And I would add that we also love to go out to properties, ones that we haven't got into, when folks mention things and we haven't got in, because we get audited by the state, and we're supposed to be into every property at least once over a 10-year period. And it's just our fairness of treating everyone the same.
Okay, thank you. And did you want to continue?
Yes, as soon as we get Mr. Spatafora back, we could wrap up with the residential exemption.
Oh, okay. Okay, we do have a question.
Okay.
Hold on, Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, very brief. I know that you have a mandate within every decade. You hopefully get into every property in order to check things out. Is that because when properties are updated, say someone added hardwood and granite, it adds the value to their property that you might not be aware of if you didn't have access to it? Is that what?
Absolutely, but I wouldn't say that that's the single motivation. Everyone says when I show up at the door that I'm there to raise their taxes.
Well, you've got a legal obligation to do it. That's the motivation.
Right, but
when you
and
get in
if I
there-
find 3 bathrooms and you only have 2, then I'm going to change the records. But I didn't come out there looking for a 3rd bathroom, you know.
If you did go out to a property, would there be an equal opportunity for you to say, wow, this isn't as updated as I thought?
Absolutely.
This value's going down.
Absolutely, it happens all the time.
Fair enough. That's what I wanted to do for
Absolutely.
clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matheson. And
So hopefully our last area is the residential exemption, if I can get full attention from Mrs. Manifold. Okay, so state enacted this years ago. Malden only jumped in on it in '08 for the first time. It's worth repeating because we deal with it every day. As Councilor Murphy said, you're going to vote a percentage. Before you do that, I have to calculate what is the average residential value. That includes the little studio condo and the apartment building. So the number this year, the average residential, I think is 542,000. The vote that you take, the percentage, is then calculated on that figure. And what I've prepared throughout tonight is based on the proposal that you were going with 30% and the 1.75 shift. So the numbers that I came up with using that criteria is that a 30% shift of the average residential value would yield a dollar amount of $162,000. That amount is reduced away from your taxable value. So if you're valued at a $500,000 based on the rules, but then you get the exemption, and the exemption this year is worth, that's the problem. People want to know what the dollar amount is. But I have to explain that in the calculation of it, it's a reduction to the taxable value. When you calculate the two numbers, it brings you to the dollar amount. So what am I saying? I'm on H5, I'm down towards the end. This year, average residential, $542,000. If you vote 30%, it means everyone that gets the exemption will take $162,000 away from their value. If the place is only assessed at $200,000, that person's only going to be taxed on $40,000. If he's assessed at $1 million, well, he's still going to be taxed on about $890,000. That's where that, I don't want to use the word discrepancy comes in, but that's where some folks benefit more than others. So this year, if you go with those numbers, the pocketbook number that someone's going to realize is $2,157.77. And that is up about $100 from last year's number. If we go to the very last page where I try to highlight, I'm sorry, I'm back in D now. If you go to the last page, I highlight all the changes. So the residential exemption is going to go from last year, $2,067 to this year of $2,157. So I think that's up about $97. That's a credit. That was what your true reduction will be to your tax bill. And it is confusing. I'm the first to admit that. The dollar credit will be, it's a D8, John. Do you have that in front of you? I've got it all spelled out. D8. Yep, about the third, second section down. It talks about the exempted amount from your bill, and then it talks about the actual dollar credit. See, the 162 is how much we'll reduce.
I'm sorry. I was just looking. Councilor Matheson.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that Councilor Murphy was also interested in speaking. I'll be very quick. So the reduction off taxable value is $162,000. At a bare minimum, you have to pay 10% of your tax bill. We can't exempt the entire tax bill.
Right.
So if someone had, for example, a condo, they're the lucky duckies here, the condo people. If you had a condo that was valued at $168,000, you'd be paying the bare minimum 10% of your tax bill. Your taxable portion would be $16,000?
It's 10% of what your bill would have been.
Okay, what the dollar value of the bill would have been.
Would have been.
Understood.
So it's not, they don't
Not
get
the
the full
valuation.
Monty and that more. It's 10% of what the bill would have been.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Councilor.
And on D4, it tells you that, no, I'm sorry, somewhere in here, I listed how many folks are going to benefit to that tune. I think it's 102 people fall into that category. Yeah, well, they're the lower valued properties in the city. It's all condominiums, the smaller properties that are assessed at a lower amount. Versus 64 people in your ward that have the high value that pay a little more. Yeah.
All set.
98 people fall below the floor of that 10%.
Okay, thank you.
And that's out of 8,000.
Thank you. Councilor Murphy?
Thank you, Madam President. And I don't mean to, kind of beat the drum on this, but I just want to make sure, we throw this residential tax exemption around. I mean, the thing is, the levy and the assessment, we in the end have a dollar value in taxes that we want to meet. So for every exemption that occurs, somebody is picking up that bill. It's not like we're not collecting these taxes. And how you see it, which if you did speak about it Mr. O'Brien, I'm sorry. If there was no residential tax exemption, if you look at the page that we were just looking at a moment ago, was that H6 or H8? Hold on a second. H6. So H6. In order to get those funds in the door, we're increasing the tax rate. So without the residential exemption, everyone would be taxed $11.73 on the true assessed value of their home. Because we're giving a residential exemption or a portion of a residential exemption to everyone, we're increasing the tax rate to $13.27 per thousand to get back to the dollar figure that we know we need. So, you know, it's kind of, we're moving money around here, and I don't think that that's always very clear to people. You know, it's not like a discount when you go to Walmart and they say it's 30% off, that you're getting 30% off. You know, in the city, that 30% off, we're still at that 100% value. Just some people are getting more benefit than others, okay? And that's where it's that 1327 that hurts the property that are higher values, okay, in our community, because they would have been paying $11.73 on their $1 million home, and now they're paying $13.27. So, you know, it's a seesaw. And, you know, people need to be very clear about that and not just continue to say, aren't we wonderful that we have this 30% reduction? Because we do have a lot of bigger old homes, and the values in our city are going up. And we want people to move into these houses and raise families and not see them all broken up into condos and have it then start to impact not the big old homes, but there's so many condos now that as you say to Councilor Matheson, that bar will start to fall, and then more people will be impacted on the bad side. So it's just something that we all need to be very, very conscious of.
One correction.
With one correction, okay, stand corrected.
H6.
Correct me.
H6.
H6, okay.
3 scenarios, 3 what-ifs.
Right.
So that 1173 that you were throwing around, that was both no Res X and no shift.
Okay.
Scenario 2 is the
shift.
175 historical shift that we've done and employing the Res X.
Okay, so
It's the 1059 one.
So 1059, so it's actually worse. I was making it better than it is.
And then back to
Pardon me.
and back to an earlier comment with Councilor Spatafora, if you go to number 3, you see that everything's in play. We're doing the 175, we're doing the exemption, but notice the commercial rate didn't change from scenario 2. And that's because that shifting is done inside of the residential class on the residential exemption.
But I still have the floor, Madam President, if I may. But I think that's another point that we all do. I am actually going to vote for the 175 shift and the 30% to stay where we are. So just to get that out on the floor. But that shift, as we sit here as a council and we talk about how do we want to attract more commercial business, because many of us feel that, you know, that is the future of our city. And that is where, you know, we're going to create jobs, we're going to create revenue, et cetera. That commercial shift, okay, is not good for attracting commercial industry. So, you know, that's, as we vote on these things, we need to weigh all of these factors because it's a very complicated process. And it, you know, sometimes looks easier than it truly is. And there's a lot of impact that happens in the background. And I think we all, I'm going to make a very blatant statement here. I think everybody here at one time or another has talked about how do we get more commercial property in here and get more commercial business into this city. So that's something else that we need to, as I say, just be cognizant of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Kamel.
So I just want to kind of take what some of the... Yeah, sorry. I want to take what the previous counselor said and just kind of put it in a different light. So we've mentioned we have 64 people who actually pay more taxes because of the residential exemption. Let's forget the shift for a second. Put that 64 households.
And a whole host of
Can I-
folks. Go ahead.
Right, and yeah, and that was my following point. So we have, if we could break it up, we have what, something like 13,000 properties, residential properties.
Yeah.
We have 64 that would pay more. How many overall owner-occupied properties do we have? Owner-occupied properties that qualify for the exemption, even if they do end up paying more past the break-even point? Something like 60%? 62%?
D5.
Thank you.
Far right column. We've been consistently at 67%, meaning there are 12, no. There are 12,570 residential properties, of which this year 8451 are getting it. That represents about 67%.
Okay, so if we were to do away with the residential exemption, I just want to take that what-if scenario. If we take that away, 64 people with the higher value homes will pay less, and approximately 4,000 non-owner occupied properties would pay less in tax. That would get shifted over to the people with the lower value homes.
It'll be spread to the whole tax base.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so we just,
Everyone would benefit from
right,
that.
I just,
Well,
some of the people with
except the ones that are,
right, some of the people with the lower value homes who are
wouldn't.
just able to get into that home, just able to make, get past the threshold of home ownership, many of them being retired and older people who have downsized, would see a substantial increase in their tax rate. So I do want to make that point. I want to bring that point of view to the conversation.
Mr. Farmer's presentation has a column that shows, hey, this is what it would be if you didn't have the exemption.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. I just want, if people are listening, and not everybody's looking at D5, H4, like Battleship. So I just want to be clear on that. And in terms of the commercial, I mean, I have definitely said it a million times. I want to attract commercial, and I'll be blatant. This might make them not want to come here, but I want to attract commercial so we can get more tax money from them, so we take less tax money from our residents. So I'm being very clear on that one. That's, why I want them here.
H4
To charge
shows you
them.
the breakdown for the last 20 years.
H4.
So this year, it's residential contributes 88% of the city's value, and the commercial folks, 11%.
Okay.
Go back to the beginning of my chart in
You
2000.
sunk my battleship. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Kamal. Councilor Spatafora.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to start with, a statement that Councilor Murphy made and then Dave Kamal said. I think, every year we talk about try to attract more commercial, and Councilor Kamal was very honest saying that it brings in more tax revenue. It does, but it also helps with the water bills as well because they pay a higher rate in our water fees. I just think if we're going to make a positive type of story to attract them, I think maybe we start this conversation now, so when we get to this point next year, maybe we have a plan in place because, there's towns around us, communities around us that their residential tax rates have benefited greatly because they have such a good commercial base. So there's got to be that inflection point where you say, okay, we should give the rate discount to the commercial property this year because residential's been getting it for so long, but that's a discussion for later on the road, but it's privy right now. The other question, which I think you might have answered, and I might have either left or wasn't paying attention, or maybe you haven't. On the CIP tax rate, on the residential owner-occupied, is the CIP tax rate taxed before the savings of a owner-occupied or after?
I can't think of the answer to that, but I can tell you that it doesn't impact what we do to the commercial.
No, but it's...
Meaning whether we had the program, the residential exemption program or not, the commercial tax rate is the same. The shifting now, the 175, is a different animal.
Yeah, but I was talking about the, I'm sorry, I said CIP. On the community, the CPA, the Community Preservation Act.
Oh, okay.
I said CIP.
Yeah, you did.
Is on the CIP, that is an assessment on all property taxes, right?
Except personal property.
Yep. Now, is that assessment done on owner-occupied? When is that done on the, is everybody pays
It's
the
on
same?
their tax, my understanding, it's what was voted, was 1% on their taxable position. So after your exemptions or whatnot, if their tax bill is
So
$3
it's
grand,
it's done on
$3
after
grand.
exemptions, not pre-exemptions.
Right, I believe it's after.
Can we confirm that? Do you know,
Yeah.
Bob?
Jonathan?
It's a good answer.
Jonathan, possibly? No? Yeah, I'll check. I'm pretty sure it's the net tax bill that a taxpayer gets. The 1% is calculated on that.
Okay. Yeah, if you
But
can
I will
just
check.
send an email, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Sure.
I mean, it's not a big difference, but I think it would be good if, to Council Murphy's point, it's very often after meetings like this, when the buzzwords come out, we lower the taxes, a resident pulls up their calculator, does the math and realizes my tax has gone up. Now, I believe we beat that to a dead horse this year in terms of being as general and as eloquent as possible, but it would be good if that question comes up, because it's the first time I think it's actually being put in our tax rolls, for me, you know, to looking at it
Right.
with the
Yeah.
math.
Yeah, we're new into the game.
Yeah, new in the game. So I think, you know, that for me, it's education, police. I'm sure the educational
Yeah, I'll
point,
check.
I'm sure the other councils would do as well. Thank you. I yield the chair.
Thank you, Councilor Spatafor. And Mr. O'Brien, just, you know, if you could get that answer, send it to Lisa.
Certainly.
She can send it out.
So I've concluded, I don't know if the Board of Assessors is recommending that we stay with the shift of the 1.75 and that we continue with the residential exemption at the 30% level. That's the recommendation from the Board of Assessors.
Okay. So that concludes the hearing for that. I declare that portion of the hearing closed. If there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition, please come to the podium. Hearing none, I declare that portion of the hearing closed. And I do have a few lights before we finish. Councilor O'Malley?
I just moved to adopt the tax rate.
Okay, thank you.
There's specific language we need to read if you want me to read it. Or you can read it.
No, that's okay. Is that what you were going to do, Councilor Matheson? Okay. Okay, so can you hold off 1 second? I'm going to just finish with the questions. Councilor Matheson?
Yeah, just a couple things real quick while we have you. I think the CPA has $100,000 of exemption before
Yes.
the 1% is applied.
Yes.
So everyone, the first $100,000 of value of their home isn't even computed when that 1% gets factored in. We know that much.
Yes, and not just the homes, though. I believe that applies on the commercial properties as well.
Right, so once again, that helps out the lucky duckies in the lower end of things, and it's kind of more borne by the folks in the higher end of things.
Well, yeah, but that really comes back to what their assessed value is.
Right.
Everyone's getting 100 grand off. Yeah, so yeah, I guess
Yep.
you could say it's similar
Yeah.
to the.
Yeah,
Yep.
right, I mean, some people might have a residual value of 100,000 after that 100,000 deduction, while others might have 800,000.
Right.
As far as the levy, I mean, I'm looking at H3, the levy is divided by the total value of all homes, all property,
All value.
all value of all property. And that's how you back your way into the tax rate that changes every year. The levy goes up, is that 2.5%?
It does.
So we're in total collecting 2.5% more in real estate taxes this year than last year, and 2.5% more last year than the year before that.
Correct. And somewhere in H&D, that info's in there. But I can tell you that the levy, I believe, was 86 million last year.
You got it.
So we come in and we do 2.5%. And then there's also an allowance for what's considered new growth. And
I
those,
was going to ask you about that. You anticipated my question.
alrighty. And so those two together brought us to the 90
90.
million figure. So that's our levy now. Next year, we'll do 2.5% on that.
And how do you calculate the new growth piece of it?
It's difficult.
Okay. Well,
No,
yeah.
you know, we,
I mean, if
inspections,
it's-
permits, inspections, sales,
Okay.
and our vendor, you know.
You try to get a sense of all the improvements that have taken place.
Oh, well, no, I wouldn't say sense. We you know.
You
if-
drill down on it.
It's specific. I mean, there's a new building, there's a new building. You know, there can be some estimating involved if on the lien date of 1/1, it's only halfway constructed. There can be some judgment there. But no, we identify all the things that qualify as new. I can tell you that's an area that the Department of Revenue looks very closely. Every year, they follow up and they want documentation on our new growth. I can only take that to mean there's some assessors out there that maybe do things right. I don't know.
I'd just like to point out that we have 3 students over here who are young people interested in voting. Are you getting all this tax information? You're enjoying this? You came for an exciting meeting. But thank you for joining us, and thank you again, Mr. O'Brien.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Matheson. I am going to declare the hearing closed. Councilor O'Malley, you still have a comment?
Yeah, because National Grid's in the doghouse with me. They definitely built new electrical towers, so just make sure that you're assessing those. Thank you.
Okay, so again, the hearing is closed, and on Councilor O'Malley's motion to adopt thank you, seconded by Councilor Murphy, a residential exemption of 30% and a residential factor of 0.903091 for the fiscal year 2019 tax rate. Clerk will call the roll.
Councilor Anderson? Yes. Councilor Kamel? Yes. Councilor Condon? Yes. Councilor Crowe? Yes. Councilor Matheson?
Yes, I think I understood what you were saying, the 1.75 shift in the residential.
I'll comment on that because I could see haziness.
Yeah, before I say yes, I'd like to.
So it equates to it, and that goes back to we're heavily residential, and when we shift, yeah. So the 1.75 equates to a point.
903091.
Right. In the Department of Revenue's software program to make the appropriate shift.
All of us regular people go down. The CIP goes down. Yes.
Councilor Murphy? Yes. Councilor O'Malley? Yes. Councilor Seeker? Yes. Councilor Spatafora? Councilor Winslow? Yes. Council President DiMaria?
Yes.
That passes.
Passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Okay, and I'm going to leave you with some documents that hopefully the clerks could have you guys sign because I have to send them into the state in the morning.
Okay.
Let me see if I can. I have D and H, and somewhere else I got documents. So.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I think what we're going to do right now is Councilor Condon would like to move for suspension of docket rules. Thank you.
To give a committee report on the finance paper that was in finance, to refer it back to the council so that we can recommend it to ordinance.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
The paper, yeah, it was 303-18. 313-18. And it was an order that the annual license fee be imposed upon all retail marijuana establishments. At the request of the ordinance committee chairperson, he asked that we agree upon a fee structure to amend this paper. It's just a working numbers, so that when my intent is to refer this paper to ordinance as amended by the Finance Committee. And the motion was to amend paper 313-18 to recommend $200 licensing fee, $3,500 annual fee, and a $750 special fee. That's the way the amendment will be read. And we voted that the paper be amended with this fee structure, which could get changed in ordinance. But that's the way they requested that we do it. So there was a motion to pass the paper as amended. And it's before this council, and I would like to refer it to ordinance as amended.
Okay, Counselor Condon, hold one second. So I think we need to vote on the suspension of docket rules first.
Thought we did, okay.
Did we do that? I don't think we did that.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay. So on Counselor Condon's motion to suspend docket rules, seconded by Counselor Spatafora, clerk will call the roll. Vote. Voice vote. Okay, there you go. Clerk. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we've suspended docket rules for the purpose of,
Sending this paper as amended to ordinance.
okay. Seconded by Counselor Anderson? Yep, Counselor Murphy?
Councilor Condon, I just want to clarify one thing. You said special fee, it's special permit fee.
I thought I said special permit.
No, you didn't say permit.
Oh,
I just want to
sorry.
make sure that it said permit. So it's-
Misspoke.
Okay, no, it's not just a special permit fee. I just want to make sure it went.
Special
Certainly,
permit fee.
went too
absolutely.
clear.
Okay, so that was amended by Counselor Condon, seconded by Counselor Anderson. All those in favor, and this is to send to ordinance committee. Is
As
that
amended.
correct? As amended. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move to the next order of business, please.
Okay, be it hereby ordained that section 700.1.3.1 of chapter 12 revised ordinance of 1991 as amended be further amended to add language.
Okay, on Counselor Murphy's motion to refer this matter,
May I actually, Counselor DiMaria, I don't know if Counselor Spatafora would actually like to speak on this. I actually had wanted his name first when I put it in for both of us, because it's actually his original paper.
I just don't know what the language is, Council Murphy, the change. Do you want to explain the change? Because it's not there.
It's basically exactly the same language that you had at the Diden Committee a year ago to basically limit any building that is currently not a residential use building that is over 3 stories to it could only be a 3-story residential building outside of central business. You can't convert. So you couldn't convert a 6-story industrial building into a 6-story residential building outside of central business. And that was the paper that died in committee.
Yes.
did you want to comment on that, Counselor
Just to
Spatafora?
remind the council, so Councilor Murphy did mention this to me 2 weeks ago. This was the paper that we originally discussed, and the council, I believe, I may be speaking out of term, was looked at it positively. There was an issue because of
Planning board did too.
yeah, the planning board too, but there was an issue with inside where the line of central business district ended, and it was the time when, I'm trying to be vague because I don't want to bring up any particular names, but when we were building the City Hall project, where that line ended between central business district and where a development that was pretty close to proximity was, and if we did this, that the development that's being done right now would not have happened, and there was some lawsuits being threatened, so the paper did die. So the hope is to bring it back into the ordinance committee to debate it again, its an entirety, and go through the same process. So this is nothing but more to go to ordinance. It is exactly what Councilman Murphy said. It's any non-conforming any building that's not residential now cannot be changed cannot be converted.
Joint planning ordinance.
Yeah, joint planning ordinance, excuse me. It's the normal process of any ordinance paper. But this was something, this is a regurgitation of that paper, but again, it was done, last time it failed because of some technicalities, and that's the reason why we're gonna try to bring it up again this time on the committee.
Okay, thank you both councilors. On Counselor Murphy's motion to refer this matter to a joint planning and ordinance committee, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the matter is referred. Next order of business.
Order that approximately 8.36 acres of city-owned land be designated conservation land. David Kamel.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Kamel.
So we live in a great, vibrant, fairly dense city, but we are also blessed to have a number of, still have a number of spaces that are raw green space. Beyond just our parks, we have, forested areas that we all value very much and we want to keep. So I'm putting forward a paper here, and I would ask for it to be referred to Public Property Committee. It is similar in nature and in a mechanism to what was done with High Rock preceding this, and what was also referred out favorably of public property tonight for some land that is behind the Forestdale School. So there are a number of parcels. Together they make up 8.36. Much of that land, 8.36 acres, much of that land probably shouldn't be built on. I'm sure if we don't protect it, somebody at some point will eye it and try to, blast, chip, whatever they can to wedge more development, more impervious surface in areas that are already having issues with stormwater runoff that we don't want to see any more of, any more water getting to people's basements, any more overflow, overwhelming of our storm drains. So I would implore my fellow councilors to please refer this to the Public Property Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Kamel. I do have a few lights. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam President. I would just like to be added as a co-sponsor to this paper, so if the clerk could just reflect that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Winslow.
Yeah, I'd like also to be added as a co-sponsor. I know this is some property up in the Maplewood Highlands area that's highly impacted by runoff, and this land is very important to preserve to help prevent that. So I think it's very important for that particular area, and I think it's good in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Winslow. Councilor Spatafora.
I would also like to be added to that paper, and I think it's important to also mention a few things about that property where it is one of the last areas of the city that actually was only accessed by a septic system, and that was the challenge with building up there. So even if this land was ever be built upon, there's other facets that would have a bigger impact on more than just the neighbors. That's also the area where there was, many years ago, there was rocks literally falling on houses. So besides just the notion of making more green space and making conservation land, there's a lot of other reasons this should be designated that and not allowed to be built upon, other than just the idea of having more open green space. Those neighbors up there really need this protection, and this is a great way to do it. So I commend Councilor Kamel for putting the final straw, hopefully, on this paper, and this project.
Thank you, Councilor Spatafora. Councilor Matheson.
Well, I didn't realize that we could jump on as sponsors at the last minute, but since that's our trend, I would love to join you, Councilor Kamel. I think life is better when you have a beautiful environment around you and not just cityscape. So I think that this is nice, and I look forward to taking a look at that land on Google Earth or a map and seeing it in public property. Well, maybe I'll take a ride over with you. All right, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councilor Matheson. Councilor Murphy.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, having received Councilor Kamel's total support for what I'm trying to do in Ward 5 behind the Forestdale School, I would like to give him my support just by saying that out loud, but also if it's going to be a group paper, I'll be happy to put my name on that.
I think we should put everyone's name on it.
I know.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, I just, as I said, Councilor Kamel has been very supportive of what I'm trying to do in Ward 5, so I just want to, say that I hope everything goes smoothly for him, and from the sound of it, I think it will. So.
Okay, that's great. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said the Ward 5 paper will be coming to the floor next week for us all to discuss.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councilor Anderson?
I just move that we make this a unanimous sponsorship and have everyone of the council be a supporter of this.
Okay.
Do I have a second to that?
Thank you. All right.
To have everyone be a co-sponsor.
I think that's a great idea. I second it. Okay. So, Motion by Counselor Anderson, seconded by. Okay. No other lights on Counselor Kamel's motion to refer this matter to Public Property Committee. All those in favor? Any opposed?
I think she did it anyway.
The matter is referred. Thank you. Next order.
Be it hereby ordained that Chapter 12, the revised ordinance of 1991 as amended, be hereby further amended by adding a new section, 4.24.2, relative to Affordable Housing Fund, Investment and Expenditure Fund, etc. Council O'Malley.
So this paper is just a subsection of the other papers regarding inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning is something that we proposed in the past. The goal is to make sure any new development includes moderate and affordable income housing so that we aren't pricing out Malden's residents and seniors. This paper is just in its infancy. I would like to discuss it with the council so it has broad support. So I'm looking to just refer this to the ordinance committee for further discussion in 2019.
Okay. No lights on Counselor O'Malley's motion to refer the matter to Rules and Ordinance. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The matter is referred. Next order of business.
Be it hereby ordained that Chapter 12, the revised ordinance of 1991 be amended relative to inclusionary zoning. Councilor O'Malley.
Counselor O'Malley.
Again, I would move to refer to ordinance.
Okay, no further lights on Counselor O'Malley's motion to refer this matter to Rules and Ordinance. All those in favor? Any opposed? The matter is referred. Next order of business.
Be it hereby ordained that Chapter 12, the revised ordinance of 1991 as amended, be further amended relative to the table of intensity regulations for hotels.
Counselor O'Malley.
So this paper, unlike the other two, is ready to be referred to a joint ordinance and planning board hearing. This would change the intensity requirements for hotels. Right now, hotels are capped at 4 stories in the city. There's been a lot of discussion about, with all of the development going on along the Malden River and the casino just down the river, is now the time to try to get a hotel in Malden Center or along the river or along Route 1. So this would, I'd ask to be referred to a joint ordinance and planning board hearing so that we can discuss that. So that'd be my motion.
Okay, I do have a light on the floor. Counselor Kamel.
If you will allow me the indulgence, I am beyond in support of this. I think it's an amazing thing that we could have come to our city, to have a hotel. I think there's so many benefits to us in terms of bringing more business and what it could do for our prestige as well as our fiscal health. And if you will indulge me to ask to be put on this as a co-sponsor.
Okay.
Because I wholeheartedly support this. Thank you.
Got that. Okay. Thank you. And another, thank you, Counselor Kamel. Counselor Spatafora.
So the only question I have, and I'm support of suspending the ordinance, is when you mention the square and the river, Malden River, are you talking now industrial and then commercial space? Where do you want to propose this? Like what, because there's 2 different zones you just mentioned.
So we, earlier in the year, we changed, but previously to recently, hotels were not allowed in industrial zones.
Yep.
It was only allowed in central business district and I think highway business. And there was no special permit required. During the process of changing to make it be a special permit, we also added that you can build a hotel in Industrial 1 and 2, correct, which is primarily along the river, Route 60, et cetera. So we wouldn't change any of that. This is just changing the intensity to allow for hotels to be taller than 4 stories.
Okay.
All set, Counselor Spatafora. Thank you. Okay, on Counselor O'Malley's motion to refer this matter to a joint planning board and ordinance committee. All those in favor? Any opposed? The matter is referred. Next order of business.
Update from the Mayor's Office on the Long-Term Transportation Planning Committee.
Okay. Thank you. So I think you've all received a letter. Has everyone received that? Okay, then you know what? Do you mind reading it into the record? Thank you.
Dear councilors, pursuant to paper 4/2018, sponsored by Councilor Steve Winslow and Councilor Peg Crow, voted on unanimously on October 9, 2018, resolved that the City Council President establish an ad hoc committee with the purpose of studying the city's current procedures, services, and projects related to transportation, planning, and research. They will further recommend best practices that can improve mobility and neighborhood quality of the life throughout the city. I am pleased to announce that to the council that will serve on this ad hoc committee, hereby known as Long-Term Transportation Planning Study Committee. Councilor Steve Winslow, Chair. Councilor Craig Spatafora, Councilor Peg Crow. I am also happy to announce 3 mayoral appointments as follows. Brendan Connor, 265 Sherry Street, Malden. David, I don't know. Santalaka of 32 Perkins Ave, Malden. And Kerry Pike of 7 Preston Street, Malden. Meeting shall begin immediately. We look forward to their reporting back to the council in the spring of 2019. Thank you and congratulations, Debbie DiMaria, City Council President.
So, as many of you can remember, we did pass this about a month ago, and the residents that were appointed by the mayor. Councilor Winslow worked hard to help fill that gap, and this is an advisory committee. And Councilor Winslow, I don't know if you'd like to just remind everybody a little bit about what we all had decided to do.
This committee is really, it's not about particular streets or projects. It's more about how transportation, we work as a city to improve our transportation system. So, we have a traffic commission, we have committees in this body, we have staff, and it's really looking at what other cities are doing in terms of how they innovate. I think there's some talk about bus lanes, and other communities doing innovative bus lanes, what other communities do in terms of like line bikes and that type of thing. It's really to understand how we're making transportation decisions and compare that to what other communities are making in terms of transportation decisions to make better things. I know just this past few days, I've had dealing with several residents who are very frustrated with traffic signals. And it's really looking at that, Councilor Matheson knows, of who in our city is responsible for that? How are we funding that? And what are other communities doing? There's a little bit of disconnect. We have people maintaining them, but they don't feel they can adjust the timing. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts, but it's really understanding, I think we're kind of backwards on this, and it's not the fault of anybody who's out there working hard to keep our transportation system going, but I think it's really to figure out how we can be more innovative and make our transportation work better for everybody, whether you're driving in your car, hopping on the bus or the subway, or getting on a line bike, or just walking through your neighborhood. So it's really talking about, like I say, policies and process and decision making and staffing. It's not about an individual thing. And like I say, what we have been is we've tended to be sort of react to problems, and this is really to try to figure out how we can be more proactive in solving our problems. So that's the really is how can we be more proactive and innovative? And to be innovative, you have to be prepared, and I think we need to work on that more. So that's really the purpose of the committee, and the purpose is to be short term, that we identify these best practices. We come back to the mayor's office, we come back to this the council, and make some recommendations. I think we've all discussed about maybe looking at our traffic commission and doing maybe a charter change there. I've personally pushed to see a lot of our surrounding communities have transportation engineers or planners that can help on these things. So those are the type of recommendations, but it's really to do sort of a white paper study of what's going on around in other communities to make our transportation planning better. That's
Great.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you. I do have a few lights. Thank you, Councilor Winslow. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to just thank and congratulate Councilor Winslow and Councilor Crow for this in your leadership. One of the things I would hope this committee does, maybe it's a recommendation of the committee, or maybe the city council and the mayor decide to maybe fund a transportation planner. I know that's something that we've been talking about for a long time, and I hope that the committee works diligently with our mass and motion coordinator to make sure that we're all not duplicating efforts, but working together and collaborating. So thank you again, and congratulations.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. I heard the councilor mention signal timing. That's something that we've been taking up in the Traffic Mitigation Committee that was formed last year. I can tell you from my experience of talking with residents, vehicular traffic is one of the major concerns. The fact that we're 5 square miles, but it takes us a half hour to cross the city because we haven't updated our signal timing or adopted any new technologies in that regard. And doing so could actually reduce emissions and reduce traffic buildup wait times by 10 to 20%, studies have shown. U.S. Department of Transportation has shown that. That being said, I just had a question about procedurally. I know that we did have this committee come up as a topic some weeks back. Was this adopted as an ad hoc committee of the Malden City Council? Mm-hmm. And was it adopted as a 6-person committee? Is that the way we adopted this? It's just highly unusual to have a committee of 6 people.
We can look.
How was that paper adopted by us?
Hold on, let me go over. Okay. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, the paper went ahead. It was a request to the mayor to establish a committee.
So it's a mayor's
really
committee.
A mayor's committee with council appointees. Mm-hmm. I mean, that paper did say we were looking to have 3 councilors serve. Mm-hmm. I approached both Councilor Crowe and Councilor Spatafor, who expressed interest in serving, and we will commit to making these public and notice to all people, and we will certainly, and like I say, it's a white paper, we'll certainly be talking to your ad hoc committee.
Yeah, if you generate a white paper, I would love to see it.
So that's really the purpose of setting up a study group. I mean, that's really what it is. So,
okay, that answers my question. I just wanted to clarify if this was a council committee or it sounds like it's a mayoral committee and he created the composition of 3 and 3.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's a study committee, and like I say, we'll be talking to everybody for their input in that, so thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Councilor Matheson and Councilor Winslow. Again, I just want to reread the 3 residents that will be serving on this because I think it's fantastic to have these volunteers help us. Brendan Connor, who lives at 26 Seary Street. David Santalaka, who is at 32 Perkins Ave. And I think he's here tonight. Yeah, there you go. And Kerry Pike of 7 Preston Street. So I think that's a nice cross the city. And congratulations to you all. Thank you. Okay, there you go. Okay, so the docket's clear. Would anybody like personal privilege? Okay, we'll start with the first light out, Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam President. I would just like to wish Lime Bike a happy anniversary for 1 year operating in the 15 communities in and around Boston. That is happening next week. And then just a reminder to the Ordinance Committee that we'll be finishing up our meeting after this meeting. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Murphy.
Thank you, Madam President. Seeing as how we're on TV again, I get to say this again. Santa Claus is coming to Pine Banks Park, his 69th visit to his Malden North Pole office. He will be there Saturday, December 15th, Sunday, December 16th from 3 to 6 p.m. The Pine Banks staff and Andrew Walter doing a fabulous job decorating the park, and Ward 5 will be there with hot chocolate and cookies and our Ward 5 elves. While we're speaking of holidays, as we are in the middle of Hanukkah, I'd like to hope everyone is enjoying the Hanukkah season. And seeing as how we're talking about celebrations, I guess I'll embarrass somebody here. Happy birthday to Councilor O'Malley, whose birthday is today.
That's right.
Good one, Councilor Matheson. Anyway, happy birthday, Councilor.
Happy birthday. Okay, that's the next is Councilor Sika.
Thank you. I just want to take the time to congratulate our Malden Papuana Junior Varsity cheerleaders. They competed in Disney World yesterday, and they brought home the national champion title. They came in first place out of 4 teams, some from Hawaii, New Jersey, so all over the United States. It's a huge accomplishment. It hasn't been done in the last 8 years was the last time we had a national champion team here. So again, congratulations, and we'll be having them in pretty soon for some citations, key to the city, and the mayor promised some sort of a parade. So me and Maria Luisa are working on that to make something happen. Little parade down Pleasant, nothing, crazy, but to the kids it'll be a huge deal. So congratulations again.
Thank you, Councilor Sika. Councilor Kamel. Wait a minute. There you go.
I would like to echo the sentiment to wish all of our folks who celebrate Hanukkah a wonderful Hanukkah. We are in the middle of that. Also want to duplicate my reminder from last week, if I may, at 630 Salem Street on December 16th at 3 p.m. We're going to be having a holiday party. We're going to have pizza and calzone. We'll have we'll have holiday music, including some live entertainment, and some holiday crafts. So it's going to be a good time. So I just want to make sure that residents there know that, and come on down and have a good time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Kamel. Councilor Winslow.
I also want to wish our Jewish residents a happy Hanukkah. And talking about Line Bike, on Monday over at Idle Hands, they are having a little local Malden celebration, so people can come down to that between 5:30 and 6:30 and lift for a brew down there. So good luck on that. So thank you. Great.
Thank you, Councilor Winslow. Councilor Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. Hanukkah began on Sunday. I'd like to wish a happy Hanukkah and holiday season to everyone. Ward 3 has a lot of Jewish residents, and my best wishes go out to them. I'd say congratulations to Line Bike, but I also hope that we do a better job picking up these bikes and putting them in the right place so that we have a tidy city that everyone can enjoy. Thank you. Okay, I'll be there.
Okay, and from the chair, I would like to remind all the councilors that MATV welcomes all of us to their studio to do a little filming and wish our residents a very happy holiday. So please don't forget that and get in touch with MATV and share some goodwill. And on Councilor Sika's motion to adjourn, all those in favor? Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.